Welcome to another Jive book review. I'm Tom Rousel, and today I'll be reviewing a book from the early 20th century that was very influential on Germanic philology in general at the time, but it's fallen out of popularity, come into the public domain, but wasn't actually available in print anywhere until now, and it's been republished by Antelope Hill Publishing, who have released it in several editions. It's by Vilhelm Grønbech, and it's called The Culture of Teutons. You can either get the hardback like this, which is the volume 1 and 2, or you can have the paperbacks of volume 1 and 2 in two separate editions. I haven't actually read volume 2, so this review is only for volume 1. That's only half the whole work, in other words. It's a very large, comprehensive work on the Germanic people as a whole. This form of philology where it sees the Germanic people as one group, one coherent cultural identity, is not particularly popular in mid-20th century onwards, because he's using Norse sources to look at Viking age Germanics, and going back to the earliest literary source on Germanic people, Tacitus, the Roman, and he's mixing them with the Christian sources as well from the Middle Ages in between, talking about the Goths, the Lombards, Anglo-Saxons. And he's assuming, this Danish expert in Germanic people, that there is a coherent shared culture between all these disparate nationalities, these groups, even over this 1,000-year period. And I think he's got a good point, actually. I mean, if you read I think nowadays some academics are actually returning to this idea that there is actually something valid here, or that you can talk about a Germanic people, because actually that is what you see in their own sources. Like the Norse Viking Age sources are stories about the Goths from 500 years earlier, fighting against the Huns. And the Anglo-Saxon main epic poem, Beowulf, is set in Sweden and Denmark, and it's about North Germanic peoples, the Danes and the Gutar, which are a Gothic people, not the East Germanic Goths that moved into the continent, but the Goths of Sweden. So they themselves obviously felt kinship and cult relation to other Germanic peoples who had lived hundreds of years previously. So the idea that we, through academic caution, refuse to recognize the coherent notion of a pan-Germanic identity is actually anachronistic. It's not academic caution so much as like a sort of unnecessary pedantry, really, in my opinion. So anyway, it's very refreshing to go back to this kind of academia of the early 20th century. Vilhelm Grønbech, a little about him first. He was born in 1873, he died in 1948, and he was a religious historian. His focus was religious history. He was a professor of religious history at the University of Copenhagen. This book and his work were important for Danish identity and like the national identity of the Danes in that respect. He was critical of like scientism of the age and like the obsession with science, and he was very knowledgeable about linguistics and history. And this work is not exclusively on the subject of religion at all, despite his focus being on religion. But this book is particularly useful for heathens like myself, or any of you who may be listening, because a lot of what the Germanic religion is really is an expression of culture of the people. And there isn't really, like, the idea of religion as being something other than just the culture of a people is entirely new in terms of the span of human history, and comes out of Christianity, which is like you profess a faith which is something other to your culture. So you could say you were a Greek Christian or an English Christian, but that's not really at all how people in pre-Abrahamic Europe thought about religion. They didn't have that notion. The traditions that we call paganism were not in any way separate from the general customs of a people. So that's why when ancient historians and ethnologists like Herodotus or Tacitus, when they're talking about a people, they talk about their gods in the same way they talk about their food and their bathing habits. It's just all a part of the cultural package of what makes that people a people. So when we are trying to understand as heathens today how to behave as heathens, actually the general cultural package of what a Germanic person is extremely important to understand. It's not really separate from the religion. Like, we now have the idea of religion, and when we have a census or something, I'll say I'm a pagan, whatever, and I'll put down that and people naturally in the modern world will understand that as being a part of my life, a part of me, an aspect of my personal religious beliefs that is compartmentalized as pagan. But actually that isn't really what being a pagan is, because heathenry is part of a holistic view that encompasses everything about you. So it encompasses your idea of what economy is, of friendships, allegiances, and duty, your duties, how you respond to your family members, how you treat your family members, how you respond to an enemy, how you respond to an insult. All these things are encompassed in what heathenry is. And although we can now say we live in a modern world where religion is a separate part of life for people, and can be considered something other than the rest of their professional life or their personal life, we have to understand that that's anachronistic when we're trying to talk about practicing the heathen religion, because it would be impossible for an ancient heathen to understand those distinctions. So that's enough about that. Let's talk about some of the cool stuff in this book. I'll read some quotes. Compared with the Celt, the Northman is heavy, reserved, a child of earth, yet seemingly half awakened. He cannot say what he feels, save by vague indication in a long, roundabout fashion. He is deeply attached to the country that surrounds him. Its meadows and rivers fill him with a latent tenderness. But his sense of home has not emancipated itself into love. The feeling for nature rings in muffled tones through his speech and through his myths, but he does not burst into song of the loveliness of the world. Of his relations with women, he feels no need to speak, save when there is something of a practical nature to be stated. Only when it becomes tragic does the subject enter into his poetry. In other words, his feelings are never revealed until they have brought about an event. They tell us nothing of themselves save by the weight and bitterness they give to the conflicts that arise. Uneventfulness does not throw him back upon his inner resources, and it never opens up a flood of musings or lyricism. It merely dulls him. The Celt meets life with open arms, ready for every impression. He is loath to let anything fall dead before him. The Teuton is not lacking in passionate feeling, but he cannot and will not help himself so lavishly to life. So you can see this style of anthropology is not popular now, but it's very appealing. It has mass appeal because it's like how people generally talk in a way about the difference between the Teuton, by which he means the Germanic people, including Norse and West Germanics, compared to the Celt, which I'm not sure exactly which groups he's referring to there, but presumably he's referring to the medieval onward sources of insular Celtic peoples like the Welsh and the Irish. By a love too ready and too undiscerning, the poets and historians have smoothed away the strong and wayward features of the saga men and toned down these bitter figures into recognized heroes and lovers. The old characters have been imperceptibly modernized with a view to making them more acceptable. The hardness and implacability of the Northmen have been pushed into the shade of their heroism and generosity and tacitly condoned as limitations, while the fact is that these qualities are based on the very constitution of their culture. Let us imagine that this idea of his, writes Grønbech, his meaning the Northman or the Teuton, is not merely a piece of poetic imagery, but that life itself with all its tasks appeared as a lawsuit, where a man with many and powerful kinsmen could further his aims and fortunes, materially and spiritually, gaining power over his surroundings, not only by battle, but by oath, in virtue of that power of race which he possessed. Let us further imagine that this faith in the power of kinship, is great enough to reach out beyond life and embrace death itself within its scope, believing itself capable of summoning and outswearing the gods, aye, shaking heaven and earth. Egil, that's Egil Skallagrimsson from the Icelandic sagas. You can see my new documentary film about him and other saga characters. Egil's words have then a new significance and lose nothing of their weight. He's talking about when Egil threatens the gods themselves in one of the passages which I read in the documentary. But they become anything but modern. The Teutonic defiance disappears or almost disappears, and in its place we have the despairing cry of a suffering human soul. The paradox lies then not where we at first discerned it, but in quite another direction. He's trying to understand the psychology of Egil Skallagrimsson, which is misunderstood so often by modern people because they hear a man like challenge the gods and see a kind of modern atheistic view, which is not at all what is there. The problem with people going directly to the primary text, which I do encourage, and just sitting down and saying, I want to learn about the Norse or the other Germanic people, and just read the sagas, you'll enjoy them. They're great. But actually, if you don't have a background knowledge of the culture of these people, then you'll misinterpret what the meaning of these things is. So when, people say things about the gods, it's not like something, a modern atheistic person would say, such as the false representation of Ragnar Lothbrok in the popular dramatization series called Vikings. What you have there is a man who's nothing like the pious man who was actually Ragnar Lothbrok, who was a full believer in the gods. But they they've made him into an atheist, basically, in that case. I think I've neglected to give a proper context to the book here about its publications. The complete edition, volumes 1 and 2, was published in 1909 for volume 1, which we're doing the review of now. And volume 2 came out in 1912. And I don't know how long it's been out of print, but for quite a long time. The blurb describes Grønbech as a preeminent professor of the history of religion. And his vast breadth of knowledge of world cultures and religions had profound effect on Danish academic thought. In the culture of Teutons, Grønbech turns his keen analysis towards his own culture, that of Germanic Europe. He was also an expert on the Turks. So that's he wasn't just exclusively an expert on Germanic people. The book is divided up into sections which he considers very important for understanding the Teutons as a race. One of them is frith, another is honor, another is luck, and the view of the world, life and the soul, the art of life itself, the soul of man, distinct from the section on life and the soul, birth and the significance of birth, and death and immortality. These are things that still concern modern men, and they have such different approaches to those topics than the ancient Teuton. So absolutely vital that people come to grips with these concepts in order to understand heathenry itself and the values of heathens. And also just interesting for anyone who's wants to know about history and philology and is just generally interested in humans and ancient cultures. But I particularly recommend this book if you're a heathen. Now, let's begin with some quotes on Frith. He writes, "We cannot gain speech of the individual human being. Here lies the difference between Hellenic and Germanic culture. The Hellene is nearer to us, meaning a modern European, for we can go straight to him, speak to him as man to man about the life of man. Let him introduce us to the strange world as it seems to us in which he lives, and let him show us the aims that determine his daily thoughts and actions. His utterance and expression form an idea as to how he reacts in the face of what he meets. The barbarian does not move. He stands stiffly and uninvitingly. If he speaks, his words convey no meaning to us. He has killed a man. Why did you kill that man? We ask. I killed him in revenge. How had he offended you? His father had spoken ill words to my father's brother, therefore I craved honor as due from him to us. Why did you not take the life of the offender himself? This was a better man. The more we ask and pry, the more incomprehensible he becomes. He appears to us as a machine driven by principles. This is very important, I think, because we're getting at what the Teuton is like. So, and how is, a machine driven by principles, an automaton in a way, whose actions are predetermined by customs that cannot be breached, and that includes killing people that you would like. Everyone talks about honor and justice, but the Teuton, killing a man who had no involvement in wrongdoing is just because he has a blood relation to the wrongdoer. And modern Westerners just can't get their head around that, I don't think. But that is a completely different idea of honor and vengeance than what people think it means. So when the Norseman talks of honor, it's not quite what the average guy with a Viking tattoo who says he loves honor actually believes in. Another quote. And behind every law decree, there is a perceptible fear, a sacred dread of interfering with one particular thing. The ties of kinship. We feel that all law paragraphs are based upon an underlying presumption that kinsmen will not and cannot act one against another, but must support one another. When the church began to exercise its supervision in matters of legislation, it noticed first of all an essential failing in the ancient code, namely that it knew no provision for cases of killing between kinsmen. This crime therefore came within the clerical jurisdiction. The church determined its penal code, just as it provided terms for the crime by adaptation of words from the Latin vocabulary. When the lawgivers of the Middle Ages gradually found courage to come to grips with this ancient frith, in order to make room for modern principles of law, the attacks had first to be made in the form of indulgences. It was permitted to regard a kinsman's suit as irrelevant to oneself. It was declared lawful to refuse a contribution towards the fine imposed on any of one's kin. It took centuries of work to eradicate the tacit understanding of this ubiquitous frith principle from the law and establish humanity openly as the foundation of equity. So here is talking about how Christianity completely disrupted the culture of Germanic people, because frith, which is usually translated as peace, but doesn't mean peace actually, as what I was trying to understand, was disrupted because frith really means like the peace between kinsmen and the balancing of wrongs and rights between competing interested parties, like various it's a form of arbitration between them to cause like a peace, a balance of peace. It doesn't exactly mean peace as we mean it now, which has a very wide meaning. The worst thing you could possibly do is like to kill someone from your own kin. And the introduction of like a humanity as the subject of law and equity, which is a Christian idea, and that's from it we have like the Enlightenment and all like communism and liberalism and all these ideas where the subject is human, whereas the subject of the heathen worldview is not humanity, which didn't really exist, it's the kinship. And frith only exists in relation to kinship networks. So there is no humanity. There is only the kinship groups and their competing interests. Another quote on frith. In the saga of Hervor and Heidreks, where Angantyr, upon finding his brother's body on the field of battle, says, "A curse is upon us, that I should be your bane. The thing will be ever remembered. Ill is the doom of the Norns." The words express his sense of being a monster. So desperately meaningless is his fate that it will force the thoughts of posterity to hover about it, that he will be a song for coming generations. The close of Hildebrand's complaint runs in Saxo's paraphrase approximately as follows. He's talking about Saxo Grammaticus, the Danish chronicler. An evil fate, loading years of misfortune on the happy, buries smile in sorrow and bruises fate. For it is a pitiful misery to drag on a life in suffering, to breathe under the pressure of sorrow-burdened days, and go in fear of the warning omen. But all that is knit fast by the prophetic decree of the Parsai. All that is planned in the council of high providence. All that has once by forevision been fixed in the chain of fates is not to be torn from its place by any changing of worldly things. Interesting fatalistic view. The Norns, who govern all things and have predetermined everything. Even when fate seems meaningless and a cause of desperation, that's still the governing principle of things for the Germanic man. Another interesting quote on Frith. He could take little liberties with the Frith as long as he was careful not to affect any actual breach, however slight, but he must always be prepared to find it rising inflexibly before him. It was quite permissible to let one's kinsmen know that one personally preferred another way of life than the one they had chosen to follow, and then one would be happier to see them adopt one's own principles. This at least could be done in Iceland at the period of the sagas, and I do not think this freedom was then of recent date. But Frith stood firm as ever. He's referring here to a saga where a man is sucked into a vengeance cycle because of the actions of his kinsman killing another person. And he then, of course, is duty-bound to go and join in by taking revenge on another, back and forth, like killing people between these two competing families. But he doesn't have to say, that loyalty doesn't extend to him having to pretend that he doesn't think his kinsman's an idiot for going and drawing them into this. He can say to his kinsman, "You are stupid. Your actions bring problems on us, and this vengeance cycle is woeful, and I don't like it, and I don't want to have to go and do these things." You can say all that thing, but none of that expression excuses you from the duty of actually taking vengeance and being loyal to your kinsman. So that there's a difference between what you say and what you do. As for disowning the action of one's kinsman and taking up a personal, neutral standpoint, such a thing was out of the question, Grønbech writes. A man is brought home lifeless. The question of what he has done, of his antecedents generally, fades away into the dimmest background. There remains only the fact that he is our kinsman. The investigation seeks to answer whether he was slain by the hand of man or by something else. Has he sustained wounds? If so, what sort? Who was the slayer? And thereupon the kinsmen choose their leader, or gather around the born avenger, and promise him all assistance in prosecuting the case, whether by force of arms or by law. The kinsmen of the slayer are well aware of what needs to be done now. They know that vengeance is on their heels. So simple and straightforward is the idea of Frith. It reckons with facts alone, taking no count of personal considerations and causes which led to this violent conclusion. Another quote. Frith constitutes what we call the base of the soul. It is not a mighty feeling among other feelings in these people, but the very core of the soul that gives birth to all thoughts and feelings and provides them with the energy of life, or it is that centre in the self where thoughts and feelings receive the stamp of their humanity and are inspired with will and direction. It answers to what we in ourselves call the human. Humanity in them bears always the mark of kinship. In our culture, modern people, a revolting misdeed is branded as inhuman. And conversely, we express our appreciation of noble behaviour by calling it genuinely human. By the Teutons, the former is condemned as destroying a man's kin life. The latter praised for strengthening the sense of Frith. Therefore, the slaying of a kinsman is the supreme horror, shame, and ill fortune in one, whereas an ordinary killing is merely an act that one may or may not be objectionable. The killing is merely an act that may or may not be objectionable according to circumstances. So the centre of the moral framework is kinship. Frith, translated as peace, obscures the fact that there is no knowledge of a peace that doesn't concern your kinship network. Peace is just about peace between kinship networks. That's important message Grønbech's bringing about what it means. He has a note here on the Anglo-Saxon poetry and the use of the word Frith, when they started transition into Christian culture and they're trying to understand the Christian ideas of peace, which are so different to Frith. He says, the translator of Anglo-Saxon poetry is faced with innumerable difficulties because no modern words will exhaust the meaning of terms like freo and sib, indicating frith. If the translator contents himself with repeating peace again and again in every context, he will thereby wipe out the very meaning which gives sense to the line. If he attempts to vary by different interpretations, he can only give the upper end of the meaning. He pulls off a little tuft of the word, but he does not get to the root. The energy of the word, its vital force, is lost. When in one place enemies or evildoers beg for frith, the word means fully an acceptance in a pardoning will, admission to inviolability. When God promises the patriarch in Genesis, in Anglo-Saxon translation of Genesis he's referring to, frith, it bears the full meaning of grace, the earnest intention to be with him and protect him, fight for him, and if need be, commit a wrong for his advantage. And it is not only men, but also, for instance, places or strongholds which can furnish those in need of frith. So yeah, he's talking there, he wasn't talking about the Anglo-Saxon translator, he was talking about modern translators of Anglo-Saxon poetry, including the Anglo-Saxon translation of Genesis, which uses the word frith in a way that isn't really equivalent to the biblical originals language, Greek or Hebrew. Moving on from frith, let's look at honor, a very important concept for the Teuton, and one that easily distorts our view of them because we have so many ideas about what honor means in the modern world. Here Grønbech tells us of Paulus Diaconus, who wrote of an aged Lombard, Sigvald, who, like Havari, was sorely tried and also, like Harvard, reaped joy in many folds for his sorrow. He had lost 2 sons in battle against the invading Slavs. In 2 battles he avenged them with great eagerness, and when a 3rd battle was about to take place, he insisted on going out to fight in spite of all protestations. For, he declared, I have now gained full restitutions for my sons. Now I can meet death gladly, if need be. And so he went to his death out of sheer abundance of vitality. Honour at once brings up the thought of vengeance. It must be so that he who thinks of honour must say vengeance, not only because the two are always found together in the stories, but more because it is only through vengeance that we can see the depth and breadth of honour. Vengeance contains the illumination and the explanation of life. Life as it is seen in the Avenger is life at its truest and most beautiful life in its innermost nature. So just as we're talking about frith, the idea of peace is inseparable from the idea of kinship and blood loyalty and the necessary acts of vengeance to maintain that peace between kinship things. So too, honour has an exact tied up to, is very much inextricably tied to the ideas of vengeance. The Teutons' entire life is so tied to vengeance that it's hard to even say that the Germanic people remained Germanic when they became Christian, and the idea of forgiveness was introduced, because vengeance is the ultimate expression of good, like loyalty and of honor and of courage in the Teuton. And that's why I think some people just thought, like, they described the 2022 film by Robert Eggers, The Northman, as morally ambiguous. It's completely stupid to say that, because you just have not understood that the entire morality of the Teuton is vengeance. It's not just that vengeance is okay. It's that vengeance is morally right and expected. You have a positive duty to commit revenge. If someone wrongs you and you don't take revenge on that person or their kinship network, that is a wrong. That is an evil. It's not just that it's a failing of your character that you're not brave enough. It's an evil. It's a social evil that a person would not take vengeance. It's something that is seen as socially negative for the entire culture. If people are not taking active revenge, men are not actively taking violent revenge or legal. You can take legal revenge and accept money, but it's got to be either you get a lawsuit or you kill someone. It's pretty cut and dry. And that's not just the Norseman, that's the Anglo-Saxon and Lombard. This is across the Germanic world. is such that this Lombard, Sigvald, he after he had taken revenge for his 2 dead sons, only then did he feel that he could welcome death. And then he was like, now I can die, I'm happy. And he ran into a battle knowing that he would die joyfully because he had balanced out the necessary, imbalances, social imbalances caused by that his son's been murdered, so that he was now considered honourable. It's only with vengeance that he could achieve honour, and then only once you have achieved honour can you welcome death. Because once you've achieved honour, death is no longer a threat. To die in a state of dishonour results in trouble in the afterlife. But what you want to do is leave a name behind where everyone can say that he was an honourable man, and that honour has to be achieved through vengeance. Grønbech writes, vengeance makes them great because it develops every possibility in them, not merely a few bloodthirsty attributes. It strains their power of achievement almost beyond its reach and makes them feel stronger and bolder. But it teaches them also to wait and bear in mind and to calculate. Year after year, a man can wait and watch, arranging all his plans and actions so as to grasp the most fleeting opportunity of satisfying his honour. Aye, even to his daily work about the homestead, looking to his hay and his cattle. It is so disposed that he can watch the roads and see at any moment if the wanted man should ride that way. Vengeance teaches him to reckon time and space as trifles. One may come through time by remembering, and one can be driven over sea and land when one has an object in view. A boy of 6, seeing his father slain before his eyes, can at once find the right word, not weep, but remember the better. That sums up very well the importance of vengeance to their notions of honour. There's a Norse phrase in one of the sagas: the peasant seeks vengeance immediately, the coward never. The implication, of course, is that the best and highest form of honour to aspire towards is vengeance as a dish best served cold. So you shouldn't immediately take revenge. You should wait maybe years, carefully and calculate a perfect revenge. Another quote. Neither did these barbarians understand the symmetrical morality which restores the balance by striking out an eye for an eye. The Germanic mind had as little conception of the word retaliation as of the word punishment. If the thirst for vengeance is understood as meaning the wish to see one's desire upon one's enemies, then the word does not accord with the Germanic idea. Vengeance was planned with every care and carried out in the most cold-blooded fashion. One is tempted to say, with a business-like sang-froid. The avenger plants his axe in his opponent's head, wipes off the blood in the grass, covers the body according to custom, and rides on his way. He has no lust for further dealings with the fallen man. Mutilation of the dead is, in the history of the Northmen, a thing so unique as to mark the doer of such a deed as an exception, that is to say, as an inferior man. I think there is an exception to that when you are trying to, for example, there is a form of mutilation of the dead that prevents them coming up as a revenant, as a draugr, or like when you fight a draugr, you may try to do some mutilation of it, like unusual mutilations to stop that happening again from the zombie coming. But but generally they don't do, even to someone they hate. They just kill them. They don't do anything else. And they also don't kill at nighttime. It's like it has to be done in the day. Like generally, like they did have a concept of murder, like cold-blooded murder. If you slipped into your opponent's bedroom at night and slit his throat quietly and then slipped out, that would not be seen, that would not be looked at favorably at all by the culture in general. That would be horrific to them. But if you knocked on his door the next in the morning and said you wanted, and then just run him through with a sword, that's fine. if it was, you'd still have to pay a vergild, you'd still have to pay his family the compensation for killing him. But that's the aristocratic way of getting vengeance. You announce that you intend to kill them, you go to them, you kill them, and then you pay his family off. But so it's not the same as like a murder, like cold-blooded murder. in the nighttime, in the dark, sneaking around, that they did not like at all. But yeah, they didn't have this idea of eye for an eye, vengeance either. It wasn't like motivated. What he's trying to say, they're not motivated like by some Italian vendetta, like, oh, I'm so emotionally like distraught. And I think that was kind of in the Northmen. It did seem that way, and I think people misunderstood. Like the vengeance is so essential that you can't really go to your death until you've sorted it out. It's something that it lies on your soul, in that you haven't finished. You haven't finished this duty. So, and it was really like balancing the books of an accountant, like more than like, instead of thinking of like a mafia boss, like passionately, taking vengeance, you should think of a bailiff collecting debts or something like that. That's the kind of attitude they had to revenge. It's like, you've done this, I've got to do this back. That simple. Nothing else to it. Another quote. From everything there is but one form of vengeance. Vengeance in blood. If it were only a question of retribution or self-assertion, payment could no doubt be made in the same coin. When men have such faith in the power of scornful words over honour, one might think they would also regard their own taunts as of some effect. But to give ill words for ill words did not win honour back. The sting of the other's words remained, and one might lose one's revenge. The right to revenge, that is. A man would hardly dare to take his enemy prisoner and put him to scorn, instead of putting him to death at once. There was the fear of bringing degradation on oneself instead of restitution, and thus it was reckoned unmanly to humiliate an enemy instead of killing him. Vengeance was too costly a matter to jest with. So it's very limited in what you can do. You can't torture. You can't imprison and enslave. You can't even just return an insult for insult and hope that would be fair. It's like pretty much, even if someone calls you unmanly, it's in some respect, calling you a homosexual is the main invitation to kill someone. So when you imply homosexuality of another man in the Germanic culture, the next step is death. Someone has to die. Basically, if you went to someone and said they're homosexual, you are saying that you don't believe they're strong enough to fight you into the death, and you're inviting them to try to kill you. There is no way you can allow an accusation of homosexuality, or what they had in the term, they don't have the term homosexual, they had neath, which basically encompasses any unmanly action and includes an association with homosexuality. Even if it's like cowardice, if you call someone a coward, that implies an association with homosexuality. You call someone a homosexual, that implies an association with cowardice. The whole things of unmanliness are one constellation of shameful activities that are all grouped under the heading of neath. And if you are accused of neath, the only way to escape the accusation is to kill someone from the kinship network of the accuser. You don't have to kill the person who said it, but you've got to kill one of his kinship network. So that shows an extremely negative view of unmanliness in any form. It's basically the worst thing that can happen. And the only way to redress that is to kill with death. There is no other way in that culture of the time. I'm not telling you to kill anyone. Now, please don't say that. Please don't let it be said that Tom Rousel encouraged people to murder. Or indeed, I don't think Grønbech was encouraging any of that. But that is an honest appraisal of the culture of Teutons. The process of Germanic law rests on the principle that an accusation, brought forward in due form, of course, is enough to compel a man to defend himself via the law process. Anyone must be ready to nullify the mere unfounded charge by his own oath and that of his compurgators. If not, he succumbs to the accusation. According to the old mode of thought, the matter is as fully decided if he had publicly declared himself guilty. So I'll say that again. According to the old mode of thought, the matter is as fully decided as if he had publicly declared himself guilty. So failing to, go for vengeance or take to law is just saying it's true. So if someone insults you and says you allowed yourself to be raped by a troll and you don't do anything about it, that makes it true. It is not known how widespread the fear was of an innocent man being sentenced by this method, because silence was really not regarded as a mute confession. Rather, the charge itself was considered as a way of introducing guilt into a man. He who fails to fling back the charge lets it sink into him and mark him. The accused does not prove himself clean, he cleanses himself. This is the dominant principle in the Germanic law process, the bond that holds the people united in a community of law. In everyday life also, it seems as if one man had power over another by virtue of his mere word. One can egg on a man to show his strength, his courage, and his foolhardiness in the way one suggests. One can force him by expressing a doubt of his manhood. The Northmen have a special term for such compelling words. Thriord, they are called. Words whereby one indicates one's belief in another man's lack of manly qualities. They're words of power that force action. So this kind of thing, like nowadays people, on the internet and stuff, can throw insults back and forth like that, like they mean nothing. But to the heathen, to the Teuton, accusations of unmanliness are magic because they force action and events to happen. There is no way to call a Northman or to call a Germanic person unmanly without resulting in killings, because even if he doesn't commit the action of renders you impose upon all of his all the men in his kinship network, the duty to kill someone in your family by doing so. And that is something that in civilized cultures you can't understand, because to quote the Conan the Barbarian or the Robert E. Howard, he said I can't remember the exact quote, but civilized cultures generally throw insults around with impunity, because they don't, there's no fear of having your head chopped off. But that in a barbarian culture, you couldn't do that. So when you're throwing insults around like that, it's actually with the full knowledge that this is going to result in bloodshed. There will be blood from the words you're speaking. So when that puts an entirely different light on what it means when you see someone in a saga use those kind of words. They know full well. They're not just like today, like you call someone a slur, for fun. It's knowing full well that someone's going to die from that. You know full well that you're inviting violence upon your entire clan. We encounter the word "nithing" now at every step, writes Grønbech. In it lies the whole fear of a loss of honour not made good. And at every encounter, the word has a deeper and more ill-boding ring. To be a nithing means that a man has lost his humanity. Although earlier Grønbech said they didn't have an idea of humanity. But their equivalent of humanity, their manhood, would be a better idea. He goes on, he is no longer reckoned as a human being. And the reason is that he has, in fact, ceased to be so. The state in which Hrethel and his fellow sufferers find themselves forms a diametrical opposite to Harvard's fullness of life. In men without honour, a dissolution of all human qualities takes place. First and foremost, the frith of kinship is destroyed. The strong coherence that alone enables the members of a family not only to act unanimously, but to act at all, fades away. The lack of honour eats through the frith, so that the kinsmen wither and rush all different ways, as a mob of solitary units, that is to say, a mob of nithings. In the house where a kinsman lies unavenged, there is no full and true frith. The family lives in a state of interregnum, a miserable and dangerous pause in which all life lies, as it were, prostrate, waiting its renewal. The high seat is empty. None may sit there until honour is restored. The men shun their neighbours and do not go to any meetings of men. Their avoidance of others is due to the fact that they have no place to sit where people are gathered together. Wherever they go, they must submit to be regarded as shadows. Nithinghood is in a process of growth, encroaching over a new stratum of the soul for every opportunity of vengeance suffered to go by. there is no joy. What is told of an Icelander, that he did not laugh from the day his brother was slain till the day he was avenged, applies in a wider sense, inasmuch as the power of joy itself was frozen. That really brings home the severity of the nithinghood. Like, to be accused of nithing is not the same thing as someone tweeting that you're gay. Nowadays, it's something you can't brush off, but it only applies if it was someone who's of equal birth. A slave can say anything and it means nothing. You don't have to commit revenge. You don't have to get vengeance against a slave because his words carry no weight. Someone who's descended from slaves, someone who's of a slave bloodline, his words carry no effect. They have no power because the power of a man's words come from his honor. So you have to start off with some amount of honor in order to damage the honor of other people. And someone of ignoble birth has no honor with which to harm your honor. So you don't have to listen to every single insult. But if these words come from someone of equivalent social standing, then they are extremely, extremely powerful. Quoting Wurlespoor, the words of the Ceres from the Edda, the Poetic Edda, of that tree which seemed so slender came a fateful arrow of sorrow. Húðr loosed it from the bow. Balder's brother was born in haste. He, that son of Odin, wrought night old his slaying. He washed not his hands, combed not his head, ere he bore to the flames him who had shot at Balder. And then another Eddic poem writes Grønbech, Balder's dreams. The avenging of Balder is prophesied as follows. Rind gives birth to Vali in the western halls. That son of Odin wreaks night old his slaying, washes not hand, combs not his head, ere he bears to flames the shooter of Balder. So here, this shows the necessary social observations and privations associated with vengeance, actually performed by the gods themselves when Balder is killed by Húðr. So you have to do things like, if a duty of revenge is imposed on you, you can't cut your hair, you can't comb your hair, you can't wash your hands. So you basically have to be in this like liminal state of non-manhood, like where you have to be like a wild thing, not washing or combing your hair or anything, and not smiling or laughing until you kill the necessary person to balance the frith and regain honor. What a weight to bear within that culture. Even women had some duties of vengeance, but not quite the same. They didn't have to kill. Grønbech writes, the fiery Icelandic widow Thurid set a joint of beef on the table, carved into only 3 pieces, and let the sons interpret for themselves that their brother was hacked to larger pieces. After the meat, she served a stone to follow as dessert. This was to mean that they were as fit to be in the world as stones on the table for food. Since you have not dared to avenge your brother Hol, such a man as he was, ye are fallen far from the men of your race. Sigrid, sister of Erling Skagelsson, accompanied her brother-in-law Thorir Hund to his ship after showing him the body of her son, Asbjorn, who had perished in open revolt against King Olaf II. Before Thorir went aboard, she spoke her mind. Aye, Thorir, so my son Asbjorn followed your kindly counsel. He did not live long enough to repay you after your deserts, but if I cannot do so as well as he would have done, it shall not be for lack of will. I have a gift here I would give you, and glad should I be if it might be of use to you. Here is the spear that went in and out of his body. The blood is on it still. It fits the wound Asbjorn bore, you can surely see. Thorgerd, the wife of Olaf the Peacock, was a daughter of Egil, and had her father's pride of race. One day she bade her sons go with her on a journey westward. When the party arrived outside the homestead of Tunga, she turned her horse and asked, "What is the name of that place?" The sons answer, "That you surely know. It is called Tunga." "Who lives there?" "Do you know that, mother?" Thorgerd answers with a deep breath, I know it full well. There lives he who was your brother's bane. You are little like your brave kinsman. You who will not avenge such a brother as Kjartan, Egil, your mother's father, would have acted thus. It is ill to have deedless sons, such as you are. You should have been your father's daughters and given in marriage. So says the proverb, Halldor, there is a dullard in every family. One misfortune all have had, it is not to be denied, is that his sons turned out badly. And now we can turn back. It was my errand to remind you of this, if you did not remember. Halldor is right when he says, we shall not hold it any fault of yours, mother, if it passes from our mind. Nor were the women afraid of using eloquent and easily interpreted gestures. Procopius relates how the Goth women, upon seeing what little fellows their husbands had surrendered to, spat in their husbands' faces and pointed with scorn at the triumphant enemies. So here, all these examples provided by Grønbech, mostly from Icelandic sagas, but that final one of the Goths, shows that women drove their men onwards to vengeance. Women suffered in dishonor associated with not having achieved vengeance against a slight. But the women were not themselves capable of achieving the honor of killing vengeance through killing. So they had to instead drive their sons and husbands on to kill. And they do repeatedly. And there's multiple, even Tacitus wrote of the women standing at the side of the battlefields, baring their breasts and driving their men on to kill. So actually, women were very much in favor of vengeance. Some of the Icelandic sagas seem to indicate that women were also keen on Christianity because it allowed a route out, an escape from the cycle of vengeance, because every killing has to have another killing back and forth until some kind of legal arbitration is reached. But the fact is that actually the majority of a lot of women in the sagas are actually very keen on vengeance and angry when men aren't killing to achieve vengeance, because that honor is on them. And they women in all cultures at all times are extremely conscious of their social status, and they're driven primarily by preserving their social status. And so within a Teutonic culture, that means that they needed to be kin to men who had achieved vengeance. And so if their sons hadn't killed their enemies, then it was very bad for those women. So they would make certain gestures to ensure that their kinsmen would do so. But women also could bring dishonor onto a family, and they had to be punished as well. But killing women wasn't generally done. Certainly, you couldn't kill a woman and achieve any honor through that. There's no honor in killing a woman in their culture. So Grønbech writes, Swedish laws refer to the right of parents to drive their daughter away. If a woman has dishonored her father's or her husband's house, she is whipped from house to house or forced to take her own life. Thus, Boniface describes the domestic rule of the Saxons in pagan times. Here you he's comparing recent Swedish history to ancient pagan continental Saxons as described by the Anglo-Saxon Saint Boniface. The latter alternative points back from the judgment of society to what we have called racial amputation. The shame is wiped out without any direct violation of frith on the part of the kinsman. The reason why the family took such extremely harsh measures against their womenfolk was not that the Germanic standard regarded women's frith and inviolability as inferior. On the contrary, since woman occupied the very innermost place in the family's frith, the danger arising from a decay of her honor was the greater. Therefore, the misfortune caused by a wife or a girl must be checked at once and effectively. But we have sufficient indications to show that men with fatal shortcomings too were cut off with the same rude hand, but also with the same wariness, lest any guilt of blood should attach to the survivors. You don't want to kill one of your kinsmen. That's shameful. There are punishments for women in various Germanic societies for things that are shameful. I mean, the Christian era Swedish thing of driving a woman away from the family. Earlier, Tacitus describes women could be drowned in a bog for certain crimes. It's like infidelity. But later Norse codes show like women and Germanic codes, women could have her head shaved. An adulteress had her head shaved and could be flogged in public. So these kinds of punishments for sexual impropriety among women were a way for regaining honor, and some of them involved duties of her own kinsfolk against her to harm her. The following quote explains how the Teuton's sense of honor informs his ethics. Ancestral ways and ancestral measures constitute the standard. On this point, Ketil speaks as the man of experience. Olaf could find no better way of expressing his sense of duty than by saying, Harald Fairhair's inheritance. And men of lower rank could find no other way of determining what was good for them than by saying, thus our kinsmen of old would never do, or thus our kinsmen of old were wont to do. Family tradition constitutes the entire ethical standard. A fixed line of demarcation, separating evil from good, was not known. There was, of course, a broad average, as among all peoples. The Germanic people knew that certain acts, such as stealing, first and foremost, and murder, alongside others, brought dishonor upon a man, whoever the culprit might be. Just as they knew that killing was killing, they knew injury was injury, but that did not mean that anyone keeping himself free from such dishonest acts was to be regarded as an honorable man. His tradition told him that what was evil for himself and what was good. His tradition told him what was evil for himself and what was good. This distinction served as a complete moral compass. To accept blood money, for instance, was for most people honourable and decent enough. But if one came from a stock that boasted of never having carried its kinsman in a purse, or always having demanded double fines for a kinsman slain, a breach of such tradition was considered hypocrisy. The constitutional honour of the race could not bear such a departure. So he's saying, normally, most people, if your kinsman were killed, you could, instead of killing one of their people, accept a blood payment, a wergild. But if your family had boasted in the past of never accepting wergild and always seeking blood vengeance, then you couldn't really break from that tradition because you had a personal kinship tradition for your family that you had to maintain as well. So that's interesting. So the main governing force there is for ethics is the traditions of your kin group. Another quote on kinship and honor. Familial history is not sensed merely as a series of events following one on the heels of another. Nay, the living are filled by their ancestors. All history lay unfolded in its breadth, so that all that had once happened was happening again and again. Every kinsman felt himself as living all that one of his kin had once lived into the world, and he did not merely feel himself as possessing the deeds of old. He actually renewed them in his own doings. Any interference with what had been acquired and handed down, even if acquired from raiding or robbery, had to be met with vengeance, because a field of the picture of honour was crushed by the blow. But an openly expressed doubt as to whether that old grandfather really had done what he was said to have done is just as fatal to life, because it tears something out of his living kin. The taunt touches not only the dead man of old, but still more him who now lived through the former's achievements. The insult is a cut into the man himself. It tears a piece out of his brain, making a hole which is gradually filled with ideas of madness. So, that shows you can't just go willy-nilly insulting a man's ancestors. It's dangerous to do so. Germanic people had a kind of notion of a soul that was shared with their kinship group, with their clan. So there are metaphysical dimensions to this idea of honour and kinship. Grønbech writes, the traditions and reminiscences of his people, the enjoyment of ancient heirlooms and family property, the consciousness of purpose, the pride of authority, and good repute in the judgment of neighbours found in his circle make up his world. And there is no spiritual treasury outside on which he can draw for his intellectual and moral life. And he's talking about the Teuton. A man nowadays may be excluded from his family, whether this consists of father, mother, brothers and sisters, or a whole section of society. He need not perish on that account, because no family, however large, can absorb the entire contents of a reasonably well-equipped human being's soul. He has parts of himself placed about here and there. Even nature is in spiritual correspondence with him. But man, as a member of a clan, has a void about him. It need not mean that his kinsmen lack all wider interest. And it does not mean that he is unable to feel himself as member of a larger political and religious community. However, these associations are, in the first place, disproportionately weak, so that they cannot assert themselves side by side with frith. Furthermore, they are only participated in through the medium of kinship or frith, so that they can have no independent existence of their own. A man cast off from his kin cannot appeal to nature for comfort, for its dominant attribute is hostility, save in the form where it faces him as inspired by humankind, cultivated and inhabited. And in the broad, fair fields, it is only the land of his inheritance that meets him fully and entirely with friendly feelings. It will also be found that in cases where anything is saved to the world, it will also be found that in cases where anything is saved to the world by being received into a new circle, a family or a company of warriors, he does not then proceed by degrees from his former state over to the new. He leaps across a channel and becomes a new man altogether. So a man is so defined by his kinship network that if he, through shame, has to leave his kinship and enter a new one, he literally has to become a new person, an entirely new man. Very interesting in such an exotically foreign view, perspective. Sometimes people assume that the Germanic Teuton ancient man of old was more like us than he is. This quote on honor expresses honor as immortality, which is another central part of the Teutonic worldview. Grønbech writes, "Honor has the reality of life or soul, and therefore the bitterness of death is removed by hope of resurrection in fame. The hero rejoiced to think not only that so and so many would utter his name hereafter. His confident faith in the future lay in the certainty that in his naming and this praise, his innermost self spread out, ruling and enjoying a living life." Now we come to the subject of luck, very important for understanding the Germanic man. It's not quite the same as the modern idea of luck, but it's pretty similar. Well, the main difference is that they had such a very strong belief in luck as governing the value of an individual. Grønbech writes, "The dweller on a barren strip of coast had little use for luck in the fields, but would, on the other hand, probably be lucky with fishing. Else he would be byrsol, which means he would always have the wind in his favour for sailing. There was a famous family in northern Norway, the men of Hrafniste, of whom it was said that as soon as they hoisted sail, a wind sprang up, even though it had been perfectly calm a moment before. According to Saxo, Haddingus too had a peculiar power to make best use of a wind, even though his pursuers were running before the same wind and did not have fewer sails. They could not overtake him, rather. Winner of battles, the king is often called in Anglo-Saxon, and the name expresses what the Germanic people asked of and trusted to in a ruler, in the great leader of the land, the king himself. The minor leaders and local princelings as well as freebooter kings without land. The presence of the chieftain was a guarantee to the people of victory in the fight. The Anglo-Saxons gathered boldly to oppose the foreign Vikings, if only they had a man of chieftain's rank to take the lead and call the local forces together. As long as he was standing, they would fight with scorn of death for hearth and home. But when word went around to assemble in mutual aid without the inspiration of a born leader, they would remain at home, or they would run off into the woods and leave the invaders to work their will in the village. Once, when the East Anglians were attacked by Penda the victorious and generally feared king of Mercia, they found no other resource in their need than to go to their old king, Siegbert, who, out of love for the heavenly light, had renounced the throne and shut himself up in a monastery. They begged him and implored him to come out and lead the host. And though he thrust aside the weapons, and with uplifted hands, calling to witness his monk's vow to God in heaven, they forced him into battle. The picture of the king in a monk's cowl, dragged into the fight with a willow stick in his hand and there slain, is the more touching for its deep historical significance. That's a fascinating story of like the Anglo-Saxons wanting to fight, and they can't fight without a leader, because the luck of the leader is what gives them the luck to have that victory in battle. They can't have a fight without a lucky leader, and having a leader who adopted this strange alien religion and become a monk and said he won't fight is just incomprehensible to them. So they just force this monk king to go and fight anyway and get killed, because they can't fight without the lucky king. Lucky leader, it has to be the luck of the leader is so important, because you share in the luck. If you have a lucky king or a lucky jarl or lucky whatever, your chieftain is lucky, then that's your luck. And his value is that he has this luck that he imparts to his people. And all sorts of different other kinds of luck exist, as previously mentioned in the other quote. Like, you have field luck, luck of the farmer, luck of the sailor, luck with women, luck with battle, all kinds of different luck. And if someone has one of those types of luck and you want that luck, you have to be associated with him to share in his luck. Old sayings sum up the hardness and the massiveness of the chieftain's gift. It is hard to fight against the king's luck, and much avails the king's luck. The wisdom implied in these sayings amounts to such sage counsels as this: one must not set oneself athwart the great man's luck, but let oneself be borne by it. When a man entered the king's ranks and let his own war luck be inspired by the higher, he became, in the most literal sense, worth more himself. The king was so full of luck that he could radiate it out to all those near him, and could even send it away to act at a distance. If one could get a chieftain to approve an enterprise by his words, "I will add my luck," then one had his war luck in one's weapons and his weather luck in one's sails. Of such a man it can simply be said, "He goes not alone, for king's luck goes with him." And a request to undertake a desperate enterprise on the king's behalf was often granted with the words, "I will attempt it with your luck." So luck is something you give and receive. But you can also receive bad luck from words. This quote reveals, once when the Britons were attacked by the king of the Northumbrians, they had taken a small army of monks with them and placed them in a safe spot to pray during the fight. King Ethelfrid, with practical sense, first sent his men to cut down the monks and then proceeded to deal with the warriors. "If they call on their god to help them against us," he said, "then they are fighting against us, even though they use no weapon, since they oppose us with their prayers." Granted, such prayers were actually addressed to the God of the Jews, but Ethelfrid knew that even though the strong words made a slight detour, they would certainly end in the men for whom they were intended. The power of words is such that they can transform a man when they enter him and make a craven or a nithing of a brave man. So in this case, prayers, a Christian prayer against you is an act of violence. It has to be met with violence. If a Christian prayer or a foreign religion person tries to pray, or any religion, if they pray in a way that would harm you or your kinship group, you have every right to act with violence against them and kill them. But also insults, as I've said previously, act upon you. They bring bad luck upon you, and you have to act against them with real action. So words and actions are the same, almost the same thing in many cases for a Teuton. In Gisli's saga, there is an exchange of words, writes Grønbech, where unluck and villainy are used alternately with equal force. After Gisli had killed his sister's husband, he was hunted from one hiding place to another. However, the incessant pursuit by his enemies was for a long time successfully thwarted by the exertions of his wife, Aud. On one occasion, when the leader of the avenging party, Eyolf, tried to drive Ord into giving up her husband, she pours out her scorn and insults him so cuttingly that he shouts, "Kill the dog, even though it is a bitch." Thanks to another brave man of the party, Harvard, Eyolf was saved from the ignominy of laying hand on a woman. Upon seeing Eyolf forget himself, Harvard exclaimed, "Our doing here is shameful enough without wreaking such villainy as this. Up, and do not let him get at her." Eyolf now turned his wrath towards his friend, saying, "It is a true word. Choose your company badly at home, and you will rue it on the road." But the saga proceeds. Harvard was much liked, and many were willing to follow him. Also, they would gladly save Eyolf from that unluck. So here, the unluck of having been insulted by a woman is almost results in the violence against a woman. But it was stopped by someone who recognizes that the unluck of receiving an insult from a woman is not as great as the unluck that would entail from killing a woman. Because a man hurting a woman is unlucky and villainous, seen as dishonorable. And to be dishonorable is to be unlucky. So it's very hard to, if you're insulted by a woman, you can't get revenge so easily. You have to probably take revenge against one of her kinsmen, kill one of her sons or her father or something like that instead. As far as the Teuton is concerned, luck is, in a sense, morality. They haven't got a universal system of morality quite like what emerges out of the Axial Age elsewhere, like in the Mediterranean, but they have some version of morality associated with luck. Luck is goodness. Here's the quote from Grønbech. "It is luck that enables men to maintain their frith and their friendship, to keep their promises and to refrain from dishonourable acts. But luck is more. It gives men the will to act morally. Rather, it is moral will itself. When Hrut utters his misgivings, 'I do not know whether we two will have luck together,' he is thinking of their power to have and keep mutual love, and their ability to create frith in their home, as much as of their power to enjoy each other and have offspring. In the Germanic idea, the moral estimate is always ready to rise to the surface. In fact, for the expression of goodness, piety, and uprightness, the Teutons have no better words than lucky, Old English selig, Gothic sales, and similar terms, which embrace the idea of wealth and health, happiness and wisdom. In a Germanic view, really, like if you have evidence of luck, like you have power and wealth and you're healthy and good looking and everything, that's the same thing as being a good person. It's not like a distinct thing. Like, you know, when you're raised like I was in a Christian terms, you're taught not to judge a book by its cover and all this kind of thing, and you know, to have pity on the weak and the feeble and the poor. But that's just completely opposite of heathen way of thinking. The cosmology of Germanic peoples is mostly preserved in the Norse sources, as most of what we know is about Germanic pagan religions and ideas. But there are some things that seem to be common to all of them. Quite clearly, there is a Germanic religion that is represented by the Norse religion. In the section on the world and their ideas of the cosmology, Grønbech writes on the subject of hell. Common to all things of the underworld is this quality of the incalculable, confusing eye and ear. A branch turns to a serpent as one grasps it, and strikes one dead. There are creatures that can twist the neck of a stranger by a mere glance. Fruits and fluids have power to maze a man's wits. There is no knowing the nature of things so as to avert ill consequences by countermeasures. Utgard extends, as we know, under the earth and can shoot up into it through innumerable openings at any time. Here and there, in the middle of the fair fields, are gateways leading down into the home of monsters. It was perhaps through one such way of entry that this or that bold explorer penetrated into the innermost region of the realm of death. One could at least get as far that way as by the long way around through the horizon. It means to the end of the world. But this home of giants under our feet is not the province of the main land out beyond the horizon. Can one go down into the earth and then home around by the frontiers of earth? Who can say? Here, what Grønbech is trying to do is conflate Niflheim, or hell, with Jotunheim, the land of the giants. But there are some overlaps, but actually I think there's some distinction. But the point being that it's a realm that is other, but also threatens to bleed through into this realm through various ways, and that it can be accessed also by the living through certain rituals and explorations. But it's hard to explain because when people draw these maps of Norse cosmology, they don't really make any sense because they didn't see topography that way, that you could actually map it out. The divine cosmology is quite different. He writes, topographical reality is not set arbitrarily aside to give place to an imaginary landscape, but to give a true likeness of the Teutonic universe. It must be adapted to include also the spiritual reality, if we can use such a word as adapt, without necessarily supposing a conscious rearrangement of observations. In the question as to the relative position of the two realms and the nature of their boundaries, all accidents of place must give way before the overwhelming influence of difference in character. The land of luck is a whole, which is not and cannot be broken by enclaves of unluck, unheora, and all that is unheora has its place as a whole outside, something only to be reached by passing beyond the landmarks of Midgard. Far from needing any subterranean connection between the cave under the earth and the land beyond the horizon, the fact is that in the conception of the Teutons, they are one and the same place, including in the geographical sense. To go out into the night is travelling in demon land. He's saying the land of the Teutons is simultaneously a land at the edge of the world of men far beyond the horizon, but it's also present whenever it's dark, whenever there's an eerie liminal space in the here and now. That's also that place made manifest in a more palpable, tangible sense. In the Teutonic mindset, gladness is a virtue. Being a jolly chap is a sign that you're a good person and that you're probably noble. To quote, the Germanic prince must be glad-minded, cheerful and gentle, whatever the actual circumstances. When Grendel harries Heorot, Hrothgar is all the same, the glad-minded Hrothgar, the good king, who in all his sorrow had nothing to reproach himself. A man must be eadi, steadfast in his luck. And this is a quote that talks about the distinction between body and soul, which we're all familiar with from Christianity and many other religions like Islam, but our modern view of it comes ultimately from Platonist views of the soul, anima, that were so influential in antiquity in the Mediterranean. But the Germanic version is not really influenced by that at all. So we stumble if we attempt to impose this body-soul dichotomy onto a Germanic worldview. Quote, when we cannot find the boundary between the inner and the outer, there is nothing to be done but give truth to the credit, and say that the body is a part of the soul, or even the soul itself. The moment we grasp a stone firmly in the hand, we have grasped the soul of the stone. It is the soul we can feel. It is always possible for the body to be sucked up by the soul and vanish away, to emerge into the light again some other time. The spiritual can leave the material to reveal itself under other forms, but when it does appear and lets itself be seen, heard, and felt, then the manifestation takes place in virtue of that nature the soul possesses. However far away it may go, it still has matter bound up in it. To a certain degree, it is possible to speak of soul and body, but the distinction does not go so deep that it is possible to wrench the one from the other. Continuing on the subject of the soul, we move to the chapter on life and soul. On the subject of name, fame, and reincarnation, quote, the name then goes out from him who bears it as a conqueror. lays the world at his feet and goes forward undeterred by life or death because he has in himself the soul. If the man dies in body, then all life shrivels in his honour, his fame after death, and his name, and lives its life therein undisturbed. It can at any moment fill out a new body and inspire it to a life in honour and luck. When the name is given to a kinsman, the soul emerges into the light again, as if nothing had happened. He has come again, men said. This is why Germanic people give the names of their ancestors to their children. It's a way to facilitate rebirth. It's important to do so. On the subject of fate and the ancestors, quote, "A man's age is determined from his birth, say the Norsemen, meaning thereby that one's history, as we should say, or one's fate, as they themselves would put it, is a given thing. Through such and such happenings, he is to be led to his end. One can recognize a hero of the past in one's contemporary by his courage and by the content and strength of his honour. His career also provides it evidence, and this perhaps is the clearest, as to the connection between past and present. When we know what sort of a soul there is in a man, we can say with immediate certainty what awaits him, and what his end will be. A man's fate is predetermined, and therewith friends and enemies alike, alliance and conflict, tradition and aim, with the characteristics of a race there follows. In rhythmic repetition, the same history." The Northmen did not let themselves be dragged off by fate. They went willingly, chose themselves that which they knew was their destiny. They chose the inevitable of their own free will, paradoxical as it may sound. Fate was to them a necessity men could not avoid, but they felt it nevertheless as a matter of will. They took up the counsels and plans of their kinsmen as warmly as their own, and in the same way they lived through the fate of their forefathers with eager appetite. They grasped firmly at their destiny with a will that is the will of fate itself. Here lies the secret of their sturdy sense of life, the imperturbable contentment with the solidity of existence that keeps them from ever going into the depths to search for treasure. All the while, they never think of dreaming and consoling themselves away from what is and must be. Name and fate interpenetrate. The name was a mighty charm because it carried the history not only of the bearer, but of the ancestors and of the whole clan. Deeds lie concealed in its sound, and they may blossom out into an addition so that the name becomes an epic in brief. It's fascinating to say the way that fate and will, though seemingly contradictory, are both influential on the idea of destiny and life, and both are also simultaneously tied to the fate of a clan and of the ancestors who are reborn and continue to live through their descendants who are named after them. And by naming things, you imbue them with the same spirit of other things that share that name. So naming is a metaphysical action. Giving a name to a child is giving life to the dead. But also they could indicate the character of an individual, not only from his associations, by his clan associations and his name, but by his phenotype. Phenotype as an indication of character. In this quote, Saxo's description of Ollo Vigatus is a study in the heroic glance. His eyes were so sharp that they smote the enemy harder than other men's weapons. The boldest cringed under his glance. He comes unknown to the king's court. The king's daughter was accustomed, in passing around the hall, to observe the guests. From the features of their faces, she could read their quality and standing. But at the sight of Ollo's countenance, she falls 3 times swooning to the ground. "Here is a kingly born hero," she says, and all cry to him to throw aside his hood. When he obeys, all the men present sit staring in admiration at his beauty and his yellow locks, but he kept his eyelids lowered deep, lest they should see and be afraid. Saxo, modern as he is, wonders at the girl's perspicuity. At any rate, he thinks it is as well with such a remarkable piece of divination that he puts it in inverted commas. Men believed that she could read the standing of the guest from his features. But as a matter of fact, it needed no great art to point out a king. it is hopeless for him to disguise himself. I think a lot of people on, a lot of certain right-wing online people generally agree with the ancient heathen practice of identifying a man's characteristics by phenotype alone. You can tell if a man is noble by the way he looks. You can tell if a man is a criminal by the way he looks. I had to unlearn the Christian teaching of don't judge a book by its cover after having negative experiences with criminal types. But soon I learned, you can look at a man and immediately tell that he's a criminal from his features. You can tell if someone's bad news. They have features that cause your entire body to convulse and hairs to stand on end. This is a dangerous individual. This is not the phenotype before you represents a threat. Your instincts will tell you this. And the heathen culture merely gave, a traditional convention to instinctive human behaviors. The soul also in Germanic religion is multi-part. It includes one section, one aspect called the fylgja, which is kind of it can refer to a placenta, but it also refers to a animal or a spirit, that kind of animal spirit, a totem animal that, a spirit represented by an animal that follows you through life and only makes itself seen usually at birth and death. And this is a component of your soul, and it can give you luck and fortune. And it can help you in other ways. And in this story, the fylgja, someone with the snake fylgja, which is an aristocratic fylgja to have, finds treasure with the help of that fylgja. Quote, "No one will dispute the power of the soul to separate itself from the body in order to live a free, untrammeled existence, while the body apparently, and perhaps also in reality, lies idle as a house without a tenant. The soul can go to whatever place it will, set out on its own errands, spying out, preparing, and also acting on behalf of the whole person. There is a story to point out the Frankish king Guntram. There is a story to point about the Frankish king Guntram. Once it is told, while out hunting, he was overtaken by great weariness and lay down to sleep beside a stream. When he woke, he could still remember how he had crossed a river by an iron bridge into a mountain where lay great treasures of gold. The soul had seen correctly, for when men went to dig in the place the king had pointed out, they found enormous treasure. But he who sat with the king's head in his lap had seen that out of the king's mouth came, while he slept, a little snake that hurried backward and forward along the water until he laid a sword across the brook, when it at once disappeared across the bridge and into a little hole in the mountainside, returning shortly after the same way." So that episode of concerning the Frankish king having a fylgja of a snake is the aristocratic association of the snake fylgja is also seen in the sagas with the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, who's said to have a snake in the eye, meaning to have the aspect of a snake, which is an aristocratic sign connecting the individual to Odin, the most aristocratic of the gods. Birth also has a chapter, and we go over again some of the notions of the soul and naming and the process of reincarnation, which is so important in the Germanic religion. Quote, "But in the rebirth of the family, the thought dwelled more on the idea of its reincarnation than that of his coming again. The dead continued their life until they were forgotten, or so to speak, dissolved in the luck. Meanwhile, the regeneration of the inexhaustible went on. On the birth of a child, the luck of the kinsman breaks out again in a new individual. Possibly, the event may have an external occasion in that a portion of luck has fallen vacant, but death and birth, to the deeper insight, do not stand in any so straightforward relation to one another. The living cannot, by simply plunging into the reservoir of soul, make its waters ooze forth in a successor. When one is born, it is the wellspring of luck overflowing, and if a dead man is to bring about such overflow, it must be in virtue of all that honour he has in himself, all that the avenging of his death brings with it. When the race increases its honour, then kinsmen rise up and make the fence wider." So it's connected to honour, the honour of the ancestors and his kinsmen that assures the rebirth. On the nature of those with high birth. Quote, "For the Northmen, high birth was the only qualification for honour and respect, or in a deeper sense, the sole condition that enabled a man to possess the skill and self-assurance that honour and respect presupposed. No false pretender could remain long undiscovered. The changeling could not hide the fact that he lacked a soul, as we witness in Queen Hagni's vain attempt to exchange her 2 ugly black sons for a fair slave child. Black here does not mean black as in the black race, sub-Saharan Africans. Black, of course, in recent history just meant someone with a swarthier complexion. And in the Germanic religion, having a swarthier complexion was a sign of inferiority within the white race. We're not talking about racial hierarchy. We're talking about darker white people being seen as inferior to lighter white people. The 2 spurious slave children lay one day playing in the straw upon the floor, while Leif, the changeling, sat in the high seat playing with a finger ring. Then said one of the brothers, "Let us go and take the ring away from him." The other black mite was ready enough to try, but Leif only cried. In this little scene, Bragi the Skald finds sufficient indication of the real state of things. He tells the queen, "2 are in here, they please me, Hamund and Geirmund, King Hjör's sons. But that boy Leif is the slave woman's son, not yours, woman, a wretch beyond most." So, the true nature of an aristocrat is revealed through behavior. There's also a concern with breeding and half-breeds in Germanic religion, or Germanic culture. On the subject of half-breeds and thralls, quote, "It was the mark of birth of the thrall's descendant, a thrall being a slave, that he saw the lesser thing first, and it grew in his eyes, whereas men of the true stock saw only the thing that mattered." The Northmen had a keen eye for psychological signs of mixed race. A saying often on their lips was, "Who is it that you take after?" And we have no grounds for supposing that it was only the one side that counted. So, in other words, both your mother and your father's heritage was of consequence. Because if you had any negative traits, it was seen that you had inherited them from a negative ancestor who you ought not to have. And mixing of race here is this is the translation from the terms he used, but race here is used in an older sense. It's not talking about scientific race. It's talking about races in lineage, which is the actual original meaning of race. It means lineage. So it's talking about mixing lineages, having a noble lineage and an ignoble lineage mixed together was a concern for the Teuton. And on the subject of naming and the luck associated with names, returning to that again, the son inherits birth and luck from his mother, but his maternal birthright is not derived from that little moment when the mother acts and the father waits. It depends fully as much upon the life that his father names into him. Going back through history to find the moment whence the act of birth derives its weight and its power, we pause first at the evening when the pair solemnly commence their life together. The fact of their openly going to rest together is more than a merely legal sign that their connection is to have all the effects of a marriage. But then, too, we shall find that the intercourse before the leading to the couch is emphasized as a sure sign of the depth and genuineness of the alliance. This intercourse is called the ale, the wedding ale. From the ale, we are led further to the bargain made beforehand, the legally binding contract, sealed with gifts and given to understand that this buying is the sign that the two are married in truth. To finish the review, I also want to touch on the chapter which talks about death. So important. I've said in some videos before that the Northman, his whole world was centered on death. The dead are present in him. He worships the dead. He welcomes death when he has achieved honor so that he can live with honor in the afterlife. He seeks immortality as his ultimate goal in that sense, through honor. Quote, "When a man has received the assurance that his luck and honor are in safekeeping, and he closes his eyes, he sets off to the place where his kinsmen dwell, sets forth to visit his kinsman, as Egil says of his son, and arrives there in his whole full person with body and soul and entire equipment. not as a spirit that has laid its case aside and comes with chattering teeth, stealing down the road to hell, but as a human being with human nature. The whole man simply continues his life under somewhat different conditions, but always in luck. Probably somewhat less than before, perhaps also in certain respects a little stronger, because the undead and the dead have certain magical powers that they receive, but they're also not particularly happy necessarily with death. All of this really adds to the picture of the Northman that is quite different from what you first assume. And I think that to summarize this review now, because I've done enough quoting, it isn't enough to read the Eddas and the sagas and impose upon them your prejudices about what honor and luck and heaven and hell mean, having been indoctrinated into the worldview of a modern Westerner. And there are certain prejudices you need to overcome to try and understand the otherness of your ancestors. Our Germanic ancestors didn't think like us. And in order to understand them, we need to understand those differences. Now, not necessarily possible or desirable to resurrect all of the worldview of our Teutonic ancestors. But it is absolutely necessary to understand it. And Vilhelm Grønbech's work, The Culture of the Teutons, is most welcome in its republished form by Antelope Hill. You can buy it directly from the publisher, Antelope Hill Publishing. If you Google that, you will find them. Probably available on Amazon and other places too. But I'll put a link to the description for it, or in the pinned comments underneath for you to buy it. But yes, if you're a heathen, definitely I recommend reading this book. It's an excellent book. Thank you to Antelope Hill Publishing for sending me a copy. But also, if you want to learn how to be a heathen, you need to learn about ritual. And this doesn't tell you how to do that. So watch this ad. Are you interested in worshipping the gods of ancient England and Scandinavia, but you're not sure how to do it? Starting Heathenry is a ritual-focused online course which will furnish you with the knowledge and confidence to practice the heathen religion, alone or with others. The course teaches you how to construct heathen prayers for yourself, not according to the established rites of any modern group, but according to what historical sources show. Starting Heathenry assumes you're interested in Germanic paganism, know about the gods and myths, and want to begin practicing this religion, but require guidance on how to do so. It is based on a micro-learning structure, which is proven to improve knowledge retention by up to 80% in students compared to other learning methods. You get more than 5 hours of learning material, bit by bit, as you please. A modern method of learning about an ancient religion. Your path to knowing the gods through ritual starts here.